Okay, we're just waiting for Siddharth to join us. Siddharth, so we're live on YouTube now. And yeah, you're still muted again, unmuted.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. Yes.
Oh, no, there's no apologies necessary for just a simple mute issue. That said, okay, so I'll just kick off our proceedings and then we can get into it.
Sure.
So this is the 14th/15th episode of Lawyers, Artists, and Others Talk Law, Love, and Equity. This is a series of broadcast media which is inspired by love for beauty and love for wisdom. Both things that we feel lack in what we know of as media in our day-to-day life, which is far more inspired by fear and anger and sadness and pain. And you don't really get to contemplate the aspects of our humanity often enough, whether it's in terms of learning from another or being able to feel and contemplate our own experiences and our work more carefully.
Right.
So that's the context of this series. And these are also meant to be public media in that India has a government channel. We don't really have public media of the sort that where the interests which are driving the media that we consume are more obviously visible. More often than not, we have trouble sort of understanding whether we can trust our sources, not trust our sources. There's so much information. So in a certain way, we're not news at all. We think of ourselves as olds, like very olds. We try to have conversations which we could have had 100 years in the past or 100 years in the future. So that's the aspiration of this kind of interaction. And speaking of hundreds of years old organizations, we have today Siddharth Raja, who's going to talk to us about the Freemasons. So my own exposure to Freemasons is twofold. The first one is Dan Brown books, knowing them as this mythical society of warriors with secret codes of conduct and whatnot. And the second exposure to it is actually Siddharth, because I've seen Siddharth posting about it on Facebook with many photos in exquisite costumes. At the least, it seems like there's a certain level of like formality and seriousness to it that, attracts you, draws your attention, and you really don't know what's going on. So it's given the mystery and aura of secrecy around it. It felt really apt to talk about it at some point in time. So I know, Siddharth, that you've told me that you're bound in a certain way about what you can and cannot speak about. And I will leave it to you to decide how you want to take us through this journey of your journey with the Freemasons. And
Sure. Thank you so much. Thanks for this opportunity. It's a great, and I like the idea of a freewheeling curated conversation. You can hear me clearly?
Very well, very well.
Perfect. So actually, it's interesting you mentioned Dan Brown. I don't know if you've given me screen access.
I have.
Wonderful. Let me actually just share with you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Right. So I'll come back to this particular slide in a minute. But since you mentioned Dan Brown, here's some of the Freemasons in the US soon after the publication of his book, The Lost Symbol, right? So this is in October 2009. Not sure if you can read it very clearly. You see, especially the second paragraph. You might imagine I have been repeatedly asked what attracted me to the Masons so strongly as to make it a central point of my new book. My reply is always the same. In a world where men do battle over whose definition of God is most accurate, I cannot adequately express the deep respect and admiration I feel towards an organization in which men of differing faiths are able to break bread together in a bond of brotherhood, friendship, and camaraderie. Please accept my humble thanks for the noble example you have set for humankind. It is my sincere hope that the Masonic community recognizes the lost symbol for what it truly is, an earnest attempt to reverentially explore the history and beauty of Masonic philosophy. Right? I thought that's an interesting starting point, especially since you mentioned it. 2 points that immediately come out of this letter, right? The fact that it's obviously got to do with God, right? And I think the first point that I always mention to people is that it's a fraternity that has at its root a belief in a superior being, right? Now, initially, that belief was, as you can imagine, with most things in the Western world, a monotheistic belief, a belief in Jesus, right? Or actually, I should perhaps step back even further. The roots of Freemasonry go back actually to the Jewish tradition. And I'll come to that in a minute. But so clearly that was the first aspect, a belief in a superior being, which has been broadened into a belief in however you define God, right? So that's very important. There are lodges in this world of Freemasonic organizations which believe in certain aspects of Scientology, for example. Right? And that can also be regarded as a belief in a superior being. But that's very important. You can't be an atheist and be a member of the fraternity. And I think the other point which comes through, and I'm sure we'll deal with this at some point in time in this conversation, is that it is men we're talking of, right? So it's a fraternal brotherhood. And while things have started to change in terms of in the historic tradition, it still remains a men-only fraternity. And there are reasons for that, and I'll come to that in a bit. But I thought that's an interesting start. It tells you, the fact that it is an organization which is founded not on religion, and I'll come to that in a bit, but it's on a belief in God. And I think that's what kind of drove...
What caught my attention when you said that, but the fact of communion across religion caught my attention than the idea of a God, So I mean, I did notice the brotherhood, and you've spoken about this before when we chatted about it, but this horizontal association of communion.
It's a good point.
Need not have anything to do with God, at least going by.
Well, yes and no. Now, I've got you another photograph here, which is the symbols of Freemasonry, the square and the compasses. But if you notice, it's lying next to a book that you can see on the top left. Right? Now, in most jurisdictions, it's the book of that particular lodge. So over here, for instance, it's quite clearly the Bible, right? But I can tell you that in our Indian Freemasonic lodges, on the altar, which is actually called an altar, right? We place open several of our holy books. So in India, the square and compass is open. The Masonic lodge is always opened. What we call the volumes of the sacred law, right? And the volumes of the sacred law are for us in India, mandated by our Grand Lodge of India. It's the Bible, the Zend Avesta, the Guru Granth Sahib, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Quran. All 5 holy books are open.
Right, but it is necessarily books. It's not animistic and tribal.
No,
practice.
It's not that. No, it's got to do with a formal religion, official religion, if you want to call it that. And you adverted to the fact as to how much I can talk about today, right? Because it's considered to be a secret organization, right? And that's true. I think the best way to describe it is that we are not a secret organization, but we are a society with secrets. Right? Like any other internal organization, there's only things that are known to members. So what I can tell you, by the way, is in the public domain and what is generally available. What I can't tell you is how we greet and identify each other in lodge, right? Which is the whole system of symbols and the rest. And I'll come. That's of course. Having said which, I remember when I made this talk on this a few years ago. I said if you type Masonic symbols on Google and ask for videos, for example, you'll get everything. But as long as I have not told you that, I'm not responsible for it. And actually I must say that because you talked about a book, right? The fact that it's got to do with organized thinking, religious thinking. We actually have a little book of our own, right? Okay, it's not Mao's red book, right? It's generally blue, okay, but it's actually it's a compilation of what we call the rituals. And if I hold it up to you, you can perhaps see it. It says the rituals of Freemasonry.
Oh yeah. We can't, I mean, because the screen share, it's not very clear. We have to take your.
Okay. Oh, I see. You can't see it on me. Okay, that's fine. So there are stuff in this book which is actually universal, and I'll talk about that as we take the conversation forward. But since you mentioned it, sorry, I'm going to stop screen share for a minute
Mm. Mm.
and just go back to you. Everyone asked me what is Freemasonry, right? And let me. Here we are. The way we describe it, sorry, I'm not able to locate that right away. But the way in which our book describes it, it's actually called, if I can, and this is something which is in the open, if you want to call it that. It's where, in fact, in some part of us, and we've asked this question, what is Freemasonry?
Mm.
And the answer, the official answer, is a peculiar system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. Right? A peculiar system of morality veiled in allegory and illustrated by symbols. So let me give you just an insight into some of that, and I'll go back and I will.
Outside of the peculiarity that of self-identification, I feel like all the other things are really common to every religion, right? System of morality, allegorical, symbolic.
Absolutely.
So that's interesting. So it's a matter of inventing another religion.
Well, I won't call it that. That's a good point you raised, by the way. That's, by the way, the point I was making. That's exactly what it is. A symbol. It's not a religion. No, I don't think so. The fact that, okay, let me answer this in two ways. A, that we don't have a preference towards any particular religion as long as you believe in a God or in a superior being. Actually, it's in a superior being or many superior beings, gods, goddesses, whatever it is. Right? So atheism, you can't. So it's and after that, there ends the religious dogma, if you want to call it that. We are specifically prohibited by our ritual book to discuss any matter of political or religious nature in lodge, specifically, right? In fact, the prohibition is so extreme. It says this, and I'll read this out. We have a particular section of our ritual, which I think, when I first read it and I had to prepare for lodge for it, and I actually got Priya, my wife, to help me memorize this section, because we actually do a whole set of skits, play acting to some extent. Yeah. And some of that is, it's like a play. So we have to commit lines to memory and then, literally bring it out properly, like as if you're on stage. And one of the most important parts of our ceremony is what we call the initiation, when a candidate is made a Freemason. And upon him becoming a Mason, there is a particular address that he is given by the master of the lodge. It's called the charge after initiation. It's 6 pages in our book, but it's so profound, I can tell you that. I'll read a section out. This is entirely out in the open, by the way. There's not a single portion of this which is marked in X's. You'll find parts of our ritual book in X and Y, because we're not supposed to talk about it. But it says this is what we need. This is one of our, what we call the characteristics of which we are, obligated towards. One of them is called obedience, right? And your obedience must be proved by a strict observance of our laws and regulations, by abstaining from every topic of political or religious discussion, right? That's important. By abstaining from every topic of political or religious discussion. Right? It's that broad. And alongside that, it's a secular belief by saying, and it says this, it says by paying due obedience to the laws of any state, which may for a time become the place of your residence or afford you its protection. And above all, never losing sight of the allegiance due to the head of your native land, ever remembering that nature has implanted in your breast a sacred and indissoluble attachment towards that country whence you derived your birth and infant nurture. Right? It is Old English, by the way. This is over maybe 200 years old, so it's a very thing. But it's a very clear thing. So it's not religion. Clearly not religion. In fact, we stay far away from it. We pay, as I said, civil obedience in our lives as individuals in society. Our foremost duty is towards to the state in which we belong, right? So I think that's very important to bear that in mind.
What does that nature in your breast mean? Was that meant to imply that you had a higher obligation towards nature?
Yes.
Was unusual.
Yes. There's actually some very interesting Masonic thinkings and writings about this. There's several hundreds of years. By the way, the fraternity officially goes back to 1717. The first lodge as we now know it was formed in England, in London, in 1717. So it's a little over 300 years old. In fact, in 2017, the Grand Lodge in England celebrated its tercentenary, 300 years of the fraternity. And so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of thinking on this natural law. There's actually a whole analysis. There's a lot of books written upon this, by the way. But what you mean by nature implanting in your breast is you would probably understand this, but it's do we what is it, Hobbes or Locke, right, who says prior to law there is the natural order of things and we need to pay obedience to that. So it's coming from that. Incidentally, talking of that, the first Masonic lodge in the early 18th century, 1717, was essentially free-thinking scientific men who came together. They had no other place to meet. Remember, we were just coming out in medieval England, especially coming out of the ravages of religious persecution. You could be branded a heretic if you said anything against the church. And then you have the Reformation and the Renaissance and all that period coming out. So, I mean, the early lodges were actually men of science. And I mean, one of the names which comes straight away to mind is Isaac Newton. Newton was a Freemason. Yeah. And absolutely. And several others, of course. So, in fact, if I just state that with this point on symbols, the universal symbol is the square and compass, with the G representing God, or as we call it, the great architect of the universe, or sometimes the grand geometrician of the universe. And you see the top of the square, of the compass is the all-seeing eye of God, the eye of providence, which of course, if I'm not mistaken, Dan Brown's references it, because you'll find this on the United States dollar bill, and the great symbol of the Union of the US has that all-seeing eye at the top. And of course, there's another story told about that. But what is it? It's a tri-square, is a tool used for marking and measuring. And if you apply it to your own conduct, what do you mean when you're trying to be square? To try a square is to check its straightness. So you're being straight or honest, right? And so the square teaches us as Freemasons morality, right? That's the important one. The other one is the compass, right? Is the extent to which you can draw things, right? And it reminds us of God's unerring and impartial justice, setting limits for each of us, the extent of good and determining the precipice of evil. That's the other symbol. The other symbol, by the way, is the plumb. Do you see all of this is architects, all Masonic, actual Masonic instruments. Masons will use this. The plumb rule or the plumb line is to test verticality, right? And you apply it to your morals, it means uprightness in thoughts and actions. And then, of course, is the level, right? Is to establish horizontal lines, which is equality, right? And things like that. So, number of
How that they picked all of these architectural or geometric symbols? You could have picked many of them. This was something of Pythagoras, because he had a cult based on numbers and geometry, right?
Yeah, true. So if you go back in time to find the roots of Freemasonry, it's essentially in the guilds of medieval Europe, right? And in fact, if I quickly jump ahead, it's. Sorry, I just wanted to go ahead. As I said, I did this some years ago. So you see, it's the foundation principles of right, is the stonemasons guilds or the craft lodges of medieval Europe, instrumental in the building of the great cathedrals. I think the one on the left is the cathedral at Reims in France, right? I think it's the same one on the right. I can't quite remember. But for example, Cologne Cathedral. This is Cologne Cathedral. The one on the right is just after the war. This is Cologne Cathedral today, right? One of the oldest cathedrals is the Chartres in just outside Paris, the Cathedral of Our Lady of Chartres. Now, in the building of the Basilica Saint-Denis, just outside Paris, again, you remember the Dan Brown connection, right, with Paris and Freemasonry, right? Now, so in the building of the great cathedrals, you needed really skilled actual stonemasons. So they formed guilds, right, like blacksmiths guilds and stonemasons guilds, and they kept them information with themselves, right? So that's the secret basis for the organization. The need to, it's almost like saying, it's like a professional body, right? If you're a chartered accountant, you'll meet other chartered accountants so that you can enhance your own. It's true of lawyers, I guess, as well. You'll enhance your own abilities by learning of others, but you try and keep it like quite frankly, an old boys club, right?
It is a cabal of some sort, right? Like we can use it in a derogatory sense, or we can think of it as fraternity.
And I'm glad you mentioned cabal. I, in fact, used exactly that word in this presentation, and I'll tell you why. I'll go back to that. I'm going to jump back to those photographs, because I realized, a lot of people say, oh, we control the world, etc. Now, look at this. This is Jacques Chirac, right? Who himself was not a Freemason, I believe, but every other man in the photograph is a Freemason. That's Blaise Compaoré of Burkina Faso, Omar Bongo of Gabon, Denis Sassou Nguesso of Congo, and Paul Biya of Cameroon, right? So you have your French Francophone world, which is actually nothing but a cabal. That's again of them, all four of them. They were all presidents of their respective countries. Ali Bongo, who's currently president of Gabon, he's been a Freemason. In fact, the presidents of Gabon, father and son for the last 50 years, are both very strong and active Freemasons, by the way. So yeah, it is seen as that, by the way, and especially in this part of Africa, which is the Francophone Africa. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No. I was just asking the question. So, one seeks peerhood both for peers, for their knowledge, as well as relationships which can improve the quality of their business, right?
Correct.
So, I imagine that there was some, I can imagine a craftsman's guild coming together. But I'm very curious to know why they felt the need to invent this. It's like...
So I think it came out through an iterative process. You see, if you go back even further, and I want to come back to this point, right? So you go back in hallowed antiquity, it's the commencement of the construction of his temple of God, right? And this is King Solomon. This is the foundational, what do I call it, theoretical basis, of Freemasonry today. That the temple of God, and remember, this is an extremely important concept in Christianity and Judaism, right? So the first temple of God was built on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, what is today occupied by the, what's the name of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? So it's hallowed ground for both Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, right? And the construction of this splendid temple of God is actually meant to represent God's house on earth, right? And it was destroyed once by Nebuchadnezzar in the early BCs. And then famously, it was rebuilt. And the second temple was destroyed by the Romans under Titus in the year 70 AD, right? And that's where Christianity and Judaism split, because then the Christian view is you don't need to rebuild a physical temple. You build that temple in yourself, right? But Judaism still is it still seeks the building of the third temple at the Temple Mount, right? So this is actually it's very, very symbolic temple itself that's actually the foundational basis. And the fact that we've got all of this temple, cathedral, all of that, all of our allegorical little plays and stories are nothing but doing to our morals and to ourselves what we would want to build in reality, right? So the book is the essentials, what should I say? Essential rituals. They are actually called rituals of Freemasonry. Is the idea of staging this, well, in different aspects of it, to stage to stage the building of the second temple, the idea that it was torn down, and all of that is actually forming parts of the play itself.
So, Siddharth, shall we shift to your experience of Freemasonry and get into an understanding of, okay, so how were you initiated? What drew you to it? What does it do? What is its place in your life? And tell us through your experience, perhaps tell us a little more about the organization, what it stands for.
Yeah, sure. So I actually, that's very, in fact, my father and my maternal grandfather were both Freemasons. In fact, my maternal grandfather, who, of course, before I could really start thinking about Freemasonry, had passed on, had a lot of his regalia, his lapels and his pins and the apron that is worn. You can actually see some part of the apron over here, for instance, right? All of that was left behind. I remember, I think we still have it somewhere at home. So I actually knew about the fraternity through Dad having been a member. He became a fairly infrequent member towards the latter part of his life. And when I graduated from law school, for instance, and started working in Bombay, I was in a firm where I had two very senior bosses, two very senior members of the legal profession, both over 40 years experience, and one of them was actually Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of India. Right? And I actually noticed one day while sitting in the office, in the late 90s, people were still quite secretive about what they did as Freemasons. They didn't even talk about it, unlike what I'm doing with you today. Right? So I noticed that one day someone came to meet him and had the square and compass symbol on something he was carrying. And so I actually said, hey, that's a square and compass. Are you a Freemason? To which I remember the gentleman called me in and said, you must meet your senior with me. He says, how do you know about this? And I told him about the fact that my dad was a Mason. And then I got initiated as a result. I got introduced and, I got in. So what I call my mother lodge, the lodge where I was first initiated. A lodge is, again, a reference to the fact that because it grew up as a guild, all these men would meet in an inn, in a lodge, right? And so the lodge in Bombay, by the way, is right next to Sterling Cinema. I don't know if you've seen it. It's an old bungalow, which is, it's called the Booth Bangla. Because it's quite inaccessible to most people. So that's when my mother lodge is in Bombay. So I got initiated in 99. And the three stages in Freemasonry are the entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason. So those are the three basic stages. So I became an entered apprentice in November of 1999, and about 6 or 8 months later, I became a master mason. So that was my introduction to Freemasonry through my senior, actually, right? He's, of course, I can mention his name is Dilip Udeshi Sahab, who was a former partner at Crawford Bailey, Udvade Udeshi Burgess. I began my career there. So Dilip Bhai was my mentor in Freemasonry, I should say, still very much alive and around. Then that's when I got in, and I was in Bombay for a few years. So, was quite active in the lodge, and then moved out, went to Hong Kong, where, for some reason, I think professionally got involved in work. So I only kind of re-entered the profession in the fraternity in 2007. And I've been a fairly active member for the last 12 years here in Bangalore. So I think the point you asked is, so that's my journey in Freemasonry. I think the point you also asked is what place does it have for me? It's a very interesting question, actually, because, I think personally for my own self, there's a lot that I've learned in terms of understanding what it means to be yourself, a member of society, all of those more esoteric kind of things. But, I've got the more tangible things that I've learned, or I should say, is that got a great set of people that I know through the fraternity, that I can, rely on to have a chat with. In fact, and I'll be very candid and tell you openly, my current firm, where we're three of us partners, and the two of us, Aditya and I, are both Freemasons. I introduced Aditya to Freemasonry, right? And in many respects, I'll say this candidly, that part of me joining hands with Aditya was the fact that I think that I had a essential trust in him being a Freemason, right? And vice versa, I should think, although it's not there up front. So it doesn't play I've kind of become less active over the last few years, but it's always nice to go back into lodge, because you can quite literally shut off yourself. Phones are on silent in many cases. In fact, sometimes they ask you to leave the phones outside the door of the lodge, right? And you spend 2 hours in a temple. It's like going into a temple and being able to shut your phones off, and some respects just sitting back and thinking or meditating. It just calms you down. Of course, the wife and the family will always say that it also gives me the opportunity at the end of the meeting itself to have a drink with all of my buddies, right? Which is not a bad thing, right? And the fact is, it's all men, right? So so it is a bit of an old boys club. Yeah, I'll be honest, that has always been an issue which has confronted Freemasonry, by the way. Why is it an old boys club?
So do you have an answer?
Sorry.
Do you have an answer to that question?
This was a question that was asked of me even when I did this presentation some years ago. By the way, that incidentally is the Grand Lodge of England's headquarters right in the heart of London.
Like it could be itself.
Great Queen Street, and that is there. I was just saying, why women? This, by the way, is the old building of Bangalore's Freemasons Lodge.
That whole building was a Freemason lodge.
Yeah, this is right behind Prestige Meridian.
What? Okay, is it still there? Does it stand?
No, this building was sadly torn down in 1987. In fact, this photograph is from just before its demolition. Sadly, beautiful old building. In fact, I don't know. I was just showing you this photograph. This is a reference to, you've heard of BVK Iyengar Road?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's brother BV Krishna Iyengar.
Okay.
And so you can see it's all the high and the mighty of Bangalore. And that was the old building, by the way. Can you see a Unity building at the back here? What is it called? Utility building.
Oh, that's utility building. Oh.
Yeah. So this is where Prestige Meridian is today. Right? And the building was sadly brought down. And that's where you have the lodge now occupies only one small portion at the back.
Right. Okay.
But this is the Bangalore's connection to the lodge. So why not women? I think historically it began as a fraternal organization. It was obviously male dominated, men only, because the idea that you could have free thinking men get together within four walls, within a closed door, where you're not conspiring against the government of the day, right? So it had its roots there, and I think, quite frankly, it's just taking its own time to change. There are women-only lodges, incidentally, in some parts of the world, but the fraternity itself, the English fraternity, staunchly refuses to admit women. There's some thinking about that. I guess it will take some time. It's just a a fact. I guess I'm not suggesting that, and I'm not suggesting that therefore it's justifiable. In fact, I've had some people say, why do you ask this question only of Freemasonry? Why don't you ask the question of other religions, religions in general? Do they have women priests? Whether it be Christians or Hindus, it's only slowly changing. So, there is, by the way, a reason for our a perceived reason, at least within our ritual, which I can't talk about. So, that's broadly it. I mean, it's a bit of a ham answer, I will be honest, but
not an answer at all to that.
Yeah, it's not an answer at all, I know. Yeah, but it is the way it is. You see, I'll tell you, I'm not very comfortable myself. I'll tell you honestly. I don't see any reason why what we consider such great and good ideas cannot be shared with women. It's absolutely doesn't sit well with many people, but, it is fraternal organization. It has its historical roots in being a men-only organization. It will take time to change. I personally don't have any particular reason why it should not be there. But, until such time it is officially changed, you have to follow the line, because it says you have to follow your regulations, right? So that's the way it is.
Yeah, I mean, okay. I suppose we have to live with an answer like that for now, because I mean, the term fraternity, of course, has a much broader.
Yeah, that's true. But I'm just showing you some connections of Bangalore. Morris William Travers, founder director in Institute of Science, the man who discovered xenon, neon, and krypton.
Right.
Yeah, he was a Mason. In fact, was a master of one of the English lodges here, Southern Brotherhood, right, in Bangalore when he was here. Harry Parker Gibbs, chief electrical engineer of Mysore. You see, that's his Masonic regalia, full Masonic, Scottish Masonic regalia, right? Krumbigal, Gustav Hermann Krumbigal, the Lalbagh, the man over here, the German, he was also a Freemason. Of course, our most well-known Freemason is Swami Vivekananda, by the way, right? Anchor and Hope Lodge in Calcutta. He was, in fact, there's a photograph of him in Masonic regalia. There's a statue and photograph of him in Masonic regalia.
Interesting.
And of course, some few more. Pataudi Senior, Pataudi Junior, Mother House India. You can imagine, well, a lot of them. And I know about Praful Patel here. I don't know why, but Patabi Sitaram. This is C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, right? And of course, a lot of our royalty, Tulip Singh, Bhupinder Singh, Biji Khair, Bhulawai Desai, Parikshit Sani, and Ashok Kumar.
Siddharth, this seems like a super elite group. You don't have any everyday folk.
No. I'm only giving you. No, it's not. It's everyday folk for us. I'm only telling you who we've had in the past. They're very well-known names, but.
Can you walk into a Freemasons lodge and seek initiation? How does it work?
Oh, yes, you can. I'm glad you asked that question. We've had many people.
I still don't know what you do. I still don't know what you do as a Freemason, Siddharth. So this is, I mean, there's a lot of mysticism which is coming out of just the, just not knowing at all. But like, if you can tell us a little more about it, it'll be great. Who can become one? What happens?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question. Any man of the age of 21 and above, if you believe in a God or a superior being, if you're coming out of your own free will and volition and are not being induced to come there by your friends, or in the hope that you can gain connection, by the way, that's the other thing. Our book says that if you are coming here to gain connections, then go away, right? So these are, of course, intangible stuff. But above the age of 21, free will, belief in a God, you can approach anyone and ask to be made a member. And then there's a process by which the lodge will ask you some questions and try and find out why you're coming. We've had a number of people join. I know that there is, for example, a very senior Mason now in Bangalore who just applied on the email, wrote to someone and saying, hey, listen, I saw your website. I want to understand what you guys do. And, will you allow me in? And after going through the process, he was allowed in. So what do? We meet typically monthly. Of course, in COVID, we've now not met for the last 6 months, right? Effectively. But essentially to conduct rituals and meetings where we either initiate candidates or move them forward in the progress of Freemasonry, and carry out these as part of this ritual book, carry out little allegorical little plays. Right? The ceremony of initiation is essentially a ceremony where the candidate is brought in from the darkness into light, and to see himself as a man, as what he means in society, etc. The second stage in Freemasonry is when you are passed through the second stage, where you are, you are allowed to learn a little more about Freemasonry. And then the third one is when the third stage, which is the Master Mason stage. This is the 3 essential stages, right? And I can tell you quite clearly, because a lot of it is allegorical about the building of the temple, the destruction and the rebuilding. A lot of our ritual relates to how we can build and do things, build to ourselves, right? And in that third stage, it is a reference to the central character in Freemasonry. The central character in Freemasonry is the master architect of King Solomon's temple. The guy who designed and built King Solomon's temple. His name was Hiram Abif, right? There is reference in history, by the way, to a gentleman by this name, right? There is reference. Now, he was killed just before the destruction of the second temple because people were trying to extract from him his secrets, right? And he refused to divulge it. So he is held up as our most visible symbol of Freemasonry.
Secrets?
Sorry?
What kind of secrets? Secrets of...
So the secrets of how we identify ourselves to each other, but more originally the secrets involved in the building of the temple.
Okay.
You know, what are the secrets as in what are the techniques, right? Because only the stonemasons guilds could know what they were doing.
Right.
So in the attempt to extract from him those secrets, he was killed. And the third degree in Freemasonry, which is a play, is effectively treating the candidate as the master architect who has been killed, and he's raised from the dead, by the way, quite literally. There's a reference to resurrection. It's entirely biblical, and its basis in Judaism, right? So it's
saying leave your religion and politics at the door, because that's
but we don't talk about what kind of religion, all of that. It's all allegorical references to yourself being reborn, right? In the ideals and the ideals of Freemasonry. Yeah.
So the values that animate you and drive you as an individual are values of equality, being upright, someone who is obedient, participates as a good citizen, so on.
Correct.
And what is the destruction supposed to be? Like, I mean, there is a death before the rebirth, right? So what are you setting aside before you invite a new way?
So you're setting aside your... it's a good question, actually. I'm also thinking about it. You're setting aside your... but, you know, I think you're setting aside your pettiness, your... narrow confines. You're actually, you're trying to broaden your mind and horizon and your thinking and actions. And, that's probably it, I think.
So can you talk about what you get from it? How is it, I mean, if you can be as specific as possible, in what ways is Freemasonry different for you from, to give you an extreme example, let's say the Bangalore Club, in terms of its capacity for fraternity, for brotherhood? I mean, there's some rules, rigidity and rituals, certain codified conduct of behavior. But what does it do for you? What do you get through it? I mean, besides the monthly communion, drinks with friends, so on and so forth, how do we understand it?
It's a very good question. Because, sorry, I'm just going to go back. The reason I'm scrolling is I just want to get to one place where...
Wait. You have to share your screen again. Because we were talking more, I just turned it off for a bit.
Okay. Sure. Just before I do that, let me get to it. So I think you asked, it's a very interesting question you asked. What does it do for me, right? With it between meetings, for example, or whatever. I think it's really each his or her, well, not her, his own. Sorry, my apologies. So I think sometimes it gets too much to be a lawyer, right? When you say anything. Anyway, sorry. So it's really, I guess it's got to do with, every person has a different view on this. But if you ask a majority of, the brethren or the guys in the lodge, I think it's just the camaraderie, the ability to not talk about anything extraneous. We come from different walks in life. There are different views, different political views, etc. All of that is kind of left out, and in the lodge itself, you are focused on, doing the play acting, and I come from a family of thespians, right, with my aunt and uncle on the theater in Bangalore, very well-known theater personalities. There's a certain calming influence that a play can give you, right? Especially if you're involved in it in its conception and its delivery. So once the doors are closed and you're in there, we follow a very set system of agenda, right? There's agenda 1, agenda 2, and it could be passing of accounts, it could be adoption of minutes of the priest. Let's like a business meeting, right? And you come to the rituals where you either admit someone, or you pass someone, or you raise someone to subsequent degrees, and you follow a book, right? And so it's important to get things right. There's a certain procedure within the lodge. It's a set of rules and regulations, I think, which help me personally kind of relate to both myself and some of the thoughts, what's being spoken of. And it's very calming. I think I repeat what I said earlier. It's extremely soothing in many respects. And I know that a number of people come to lodge meetings, they may not have come for months together, but they come saying, listen, I missed it because I just want to get away from the madness around us. And I'll be honest, it is to some extent a refuge. I actually look at that as being one of the central things that I like about it.
Yeah, but so I'm going to restate for my understanding. So for you, it holds a place in your life much where you can express yourself within a rigid form, because even the rigid form gives you the certain freedom not to bother yourself with things that don't have to affect the insides of that form, right? So if you have to leave your things at the door, play act in a certain way, connect to yourselves and the values that you hold dear with people who have a similar aspiration.
Correct.
The ideal is really just a communion. You could, for instance, have a bird watchers club and have the same kind of.
I agree, absolutely. It's a very important point to bring out. It's to each his own. I fully agree to that. There are a number of people whom we've admitted as members and initiates who don't come at all because they've kind of said, boss, it's another one of these little, clubs. I might as well. I don't like it. And you know what? So it's to each his own. So I know that there are a whole bunch of people that I've introduced to the fraternity who don't come regularly. They come on and off. Some folks have not even come for over 6 years. They've lost interest. And so you have all of that, right, as well. They say, no, I find my communion, I find my peace of mind elsewhere, right? I agree with you. If you really break it down, I think the point you asked, right? Can I get the similar kind of communion and peace of mind, etc., maybe at the umbrella bar at the Bangalore club, vis-a-vis the lodge not many kilometers away? Yeah, there are some people who do have that view. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I mean, but it's really a matter of what it is for you. Like so many people were very curious about your session because but hearing you say that, I'm just wondering whether it's because they miss communion in their life or because there's something unique and exceptional about the way Freemasons go about their.
See, we follow a script. I think that's the most important thing. Many people have asked me, but listen, why should I join you? I might as well join the local Rotary Club.
You don't have to answer that question as well. Right? It is a voluntary organization.
Yeah.
And organizations are voluntary organizations.
No, but you see that we follow a very, very particular script. The book that I was telling you about, which I've got with me, it is meant to be adhered to. So there's a certain formality involved, right? Of course, a word here or two words there going astray is never going to be. It's like in a play, right? As long as you get the essence out, right? But the fact that you're following a rigid script actually means it's very different from many other organizations, right? And that kind of guides the mind. I know that a number of people, there are guys who are there from, who come from different walks of life, incidentally. We have a number of people who are, who hardly deal with English on a daily basis. I know that a couple of in my lodge, for instance. One of them has actually grown up into the ranks and has become master of the lodge. He's not very comfortable with the English language, right? But he likes coming. You know why? Because he says it gives me certain structure, right? Yes, I'm not very good at it. I struggle. I mispronounce. It's okay, And then there are the hardliners who say no, you have to. It has to be word perfect. You can't miss a comma. You can't miss an and the. I say go to hell. As long as you get the essence right, it works. And there are guys who really, really like coming in there for that reason. In fact, I'm reminded of this man. English is not his everyday language, but he likes to come there because he meets people who he can relate to. And he's able to, participate in a ceremony. It's almost like a temple, right? It is a structured ceremony, right? Where you must say the swahas at the right time,
Yeah.
right? Right? If you have to get ahead, but and it's okay if you make a few mistakes, and that really does. I think it focuses a lot of people. And I'll be honest, okay, I'll say this flippantly, but I can tell you there are a number of people, me included at some points in time, like to be there because we can just shut off at the end of the meeting. It is normally at about 8:30. The lodge closes officially at 10:30. Get an hour and a half, get a couple of drinks, backslap, talk a few things, and leave at 10:30. Incidentally, in Bangalore, the lodge shuts extremely sharp, but they throw you out at 10:30. So there's no question of you hanging on any further.
I mean, do you continue to keep your phones after, or is the phone still outside at this point?
No. When the meeting is over and the doors are open, we take our phones, and then, of course, people are around. Some people leave almost immediately because a number of them, by the way, I must say this, they like entirely what goes on within the four walls of the temple itself. Right. We call it the temple, right? But there are people who will stay on because they want the camaraderie that follows after. In fact, there's this one portion of our ritual which says, it has to be, we must go from labor to refreshment, right? Or from refreshment to labor, as the case may be, right? And that's part and parcel of this. And
Can you explain that? What do you mean?
So the labor that you do, the actual play acting within the temple, right, has to be followed by refreshment, right? So that's the thing. I must say, just talking of that, there is one particular aspect of our ritual book which says, it's almost completely opposed to our Hindu philosophy, right? It is the hope of reward which sweetens labor, right? There is actually one part of our ritual book which says exactly what I just told you. It is the hope of reward that sweetens labor. Now, that, as you know, is completely opposed to our Hindu philosophy.
You don't have any expectations of outcomes.
Yeah. I must end, by the way, I know we are running out of time, but I'm going to just share something that I discovered some years ago when I was looking at this presentation. Can you see my screen?
Not yet. Have you?
Sorry. Oh, sorry. My apologies. I'll just let me just share the screen. I haven't. Yeah. Can you share it now? Can you see it now?
Forget me not.
No, I'm going to go back one. Let me just. This is an extract, by the way, as I call it, a Masonic non-connection. This is an extract from a statement by Hermann Göring, right? He says, I had a date to meet some friends to join the Freemasons in 1919. While waiting for them, I saw a pretty blonde pass by and I picked her up. Well, I just never did get around to joining the Freemasons. If I hadn't picked up that blonde that day, it would have been impossible for me to get into the party and I wouldn't be here today. This is when he was standing trial at Nuremberg. The Jewish connection being obvious as to why the Nazis hated thing. But something that I just found this interesting, by the way, because one of our symbols, by the way, is the forget-me-not symbol, which is how German Freemasons had to identify themselves because the square and compass was off limits. The Nazis were vehemently anti-Masonic, anti-Masonic, vehemently anti-Masonic. Incidentally, there's a large tradition in the US, by the way, of that. And one other thing I quickly wanted to show you from this, very interesting little sidebar. 14 or 15 US presidents have been Freemasons, active Freemasons. Many of them less active than the others, but let me quickly get to where I wanted to show you, because I know you have a few minutes before you start the other section.
No.
Here, sorry, just bear with me a minute. Here we are. That's the lodge in England. That's our Bangalore lodge. So one of the George Washington was very active Freemason. In fact, I think it was in one of the Dan Brown movies, he talks about the orientation of Washington, D.C., right? In the shape of the square and the compass.
Right.
But sorry, let me just get there. Yeah. Of course, Winston Churchill these days is not to be spoken of. Right? Buzz Aldrin and Ed Glenn. Here. One of the most well-known Freemasons, the last Freemason in the US presidency was Gerald Ford. Right? He was a 33rd degree, the highest that you can get, Freemason. And this is his inaugural address, by the way, after Nixon's resignation. I thought it really important because these words are almost directly lifted from our book.
You're right.
But there is a higher power, by whatever name we honor him, who ordains not only righteousness, but love, not justice, but mercy. The fundamental precepts of Freemasonry is called brotherly love, relief, and truth.
Brotherly love, relief, and truth.
Brotherly love, relief as in support of each other, and truth. And these words can literally be taken from our book, who ordains not only righteousness, but love, not only justice, but mercy. Gerald Ford was a very active Freemason, as was the other 33rd degree Freemason was Harry Truman. Right? Lincoln was not. Right? He would have, because he agreed to become a Freemason after he demitted office, which of course never came to pass. Right? And that's what I'm talking about. Brotherly love, relief, and truth. That's the thing. And of course, the reference to the handshake and the symbols and all of that are all there.
The connotations. Interesting. And do you want to tell me how like brotherly love is different from other forms of love?
Ooh la la.
Illegal questions, is it?
No, I don't think it's a good question, It's to some extent, what should I say, brotherhood, right? If you talk of brotherhood, it's each person, and it could be anything. It could be brotherhood, sisterhood, fraternity, whatever it is. You're able to understand and relate to, help the other person. I'm thinking about it as you speak. I'm thinking of, the kind of mental health issues we're facing today, of course, highlighted by the death a few days ago of, what's his name? Sushant Singh, right? The number of guys who I can tell you who come into the lodge and who are really troubled. They've got, business issues. As I said, so many of them come and say, listen, I want to literally get into a temple where I can shut off and, just contemplate the world. Yeah. I think it helps to have people around, just to be able to open up, to talk.
Yeah.
We've had number of guys who've gone through drinking problems, family problems, all of that, And I'm not saying we're some kind of magical organization that can help all of them, but a number of them like to come in because they like to unburden themselves. I think that's how I look at brotherly love, really. The ability that I can today talk to people and unburden oneself. Sorry.
Without feeling judgmentally towards another.
Yeah, correct. I agree.
A sense of peership. The sense that you might not hesitate to look messy and ugly in front of them, not
correct. Correct.
What about relief and truth? How do you think about truth in this context if you have a conception of God? Because the conception of God as truth might be different from what we understand of
I agree.
Day-to-day context, right? So how does it play out? Can you tell us about these two values as well?
Sorry, just repeat yourself. I lost you for a minute.
I said, how do we talk about truth and relief as these ideas? So relief, I'm understanding as service, broadly.
Yes, correct.
If we speak about, what does truth mean, though?
That's an extremely important question, actually. Again, a lot of it, I think has got to do both with it's largely to do with the expression of what you say or do, right? And so you have to be upright. The points I mentioned allegorically earlier, right? You square your virtues, you follow equality, and all of those things. So I think truth lies in not the 100% accuracy, tending towards that, but your own belief and your faith in your belief and your ability to stand by it and apply those principles to your life.
But I mean, that is still so confusing, Siddharth, because
I know. I'm trying. As you're talking, I'm trying to think. Let me in closing. I know you've got other stuff coming. Let me in closing read to you. No, I really want to read to you one portion of this. This is something else.
It'll give us an interesting transition into the next segment of our conversation.
See, one part of our ceremony talks about a presentation of the working tools of a Freemason. Right? And it begins with what is called the 24-inch gauge, the common gavel, and the compass. Right? Let me read this to you. In this, the 24-inch gavel represents the 24 hours of the day. Part to be spent in prayer to Almighty God, part in labor and refreshment, and part in serving a friend or brother in time of need, without detriment to ourselves or connections. The common gavel represents the force of conscience, and it teaches us that skill without exertion is of little avail, for the heart may conceive and the head devise in vain, if the hand be not prompt to execute the design. And the compass points out to us the advantages of education, by which means alone we are rendered fit members of regularly organized society. Right? All, I think, aspects of that truth.
There's nothing I would disagree with there, Siddharth. I mean,
you can't. It's nothing at all that you can disagree. Which is why I read this out to many people who say, "Hey, what do you do?" I said, "This is what I do. This is what we learn." No, it's a very, very. I mean, they're all, of course, many people say, but this is some, claptrap again. You get it from various religious books. What difference does it make? Well, I don't know.
I mean, I'm just we are having slight with Jameson and Kanan joining. They seem to be coming in and out. They'll be here in a minute. But that said, I'm just trying to think about this as a matter of personal religion. You can construct a religion that you're most comfortable with for yourself.
Yeah.
You really don't have to.
But religion, in that sense of the word, is nothing but a framework of your own morality, right?
Right.
So that's what I'm talking
about. Okay. So, I mean, any form of organized religion, though, can be more damaging than one would aspire. So it's a little difficult to say. Hi, Kanan. Kanan, it's good to see you. I'm going to ask. Hi.
Hello.
Hey, can you just speak once again? Jameson's here as well.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, fabulously well. And hi, Jameson. Good to see you. Like, I'm echoing somewhere else though. Though maybe not.
Hey, how are you?
Well, okay. Sounds great. Okay, it's good to have you all here. And now Kanan's dropped off. Suppose this is normal, right? You're supposed to drop off a Zoom call 3 times before you can begin any conversation. So while Kanan is going to join us, let me just introduce what's happening here for everyone else who is joining us around now. So this is the 14th/15th episode of Lawyers, Artists, and Others Talk Law, Love, and Equity. The aspiration of this form of broadcast media is to create one which is inspired by love for beauty and love for wisdom. We feel like not enough of the media that we consume have either of those aspirations, So we try to have conversations. I mean, the first hour, we go up thrice a week on Sundays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And the first hour is usually dedicated to some aspect of art or curiosity. Today's session was a conversation about Freemasonry, Freemasons in India with Siddharth, who also doubles up as a partner at a law firm in Bangalore. And the second...
And you forgot something. Not just doubles up as a partner in a law firm. Once our Masonic meetings are over, we head out in groups and then murder people as well.
Oh, yeah.
Carve them up.
That's not good. You need a new hobby. You should.
Jack the Ripper was said to have been a Freemason, by the way, incidentally.
Okay.
All the, I mean,
I missed the context.
No, sorry, just jokes apart. Sorry, Badri, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
you're not helping your PR, Siddharth. The point of you having this conversation today was to suddenly stop being. But in any case, so we were speaking about Freemasonry, and we were speaking about, it's interesting, the bridge between the first conversation and the second conversation today, because both of these conversations are in some way about fraternity. The enterprise of justice is really everyone's responsibility. There's no reason why we need to think of lawyers as the sole preserve of lawmaking, right? And we often do. We think of politics and parliamentarians as the authoritarians of law. But it's really not how it needs to be, and that's not how it is, I think, if we can organize ourselves better. So today's conversation is going to be about legal hacking, and we'll speak a little more about it as it goes along. We have about an hour or so before, so we have a slightly shorter episode than usual today, so we will wrap up a little ahead of time. But before we get into the meat of our conversation, we do a quick round of introductions, and I'm going to have to ask all of you to introduce yourself without talking about what you do or where you're from, right? We know enough about what you do. We're going to speak a lot more about what you do and where you're from and everything else associated. But in the interest of learning a little more about the richness of your lives, because all of you have supremely interesting lives outside of the work that you do, it'd be wonderful to learn about you from a slightly different perspective. And Siddharth, because you've been speaking now for an hour and you're sufficiently warmed up, we'll start with you. And we'll keep it like short enough because I guess we have to be a little quicker than we are usually.
Sure. I will just hey, good. Thanks so much, Badri. Just to say that Siddharth Raja, and since you said not what I do, I'm a passionate, what should I say, micro historian, if I can call it that, with a special emphasis on trying to understand the colonial period in India. Although again, especially with regard to the princely state of Mysore, I live, outside of Bangalore, so I don't have to deal with oftentimes the crazy traffic situation, and an old Bangalorean. So that's what I consider myself to be.
You are from, but I suppose the answer is totally relevant. Your microhistory is fascinating, and we're going to have you back on at some point in time talking about the forts and ruins around Bangalore, right? You've been doing these walks for several now, I think, surely
5-6 years now.
Yeah, so over 1,000 people have experienced the microhistory, not the sort that you can pick up from a textbook around town. So anyway, thanks for that, Siddharth. Jameson, how would you talk about yourself without talking about what you're from?
Yeah, it's thank you very much, Badri, for this opportunity. It's nice to meet all of you. I'm looking forward to the discussion. My name is Jameson Dempsey. I am without talking about what I do. I'm a person who cares deeply about creative culture, and I've spent my life playing music and playing and particularly playing in bands with other people, which is a very unique context. It's people coming together for no other purpose than to be creative with one another, to see what they can do, to push each other's boundaries and creativity, and have some sort of output, whether that's for the public or just for yourself. And I've applied that context in just about everything that I do, whether that's through legal hackers or through other avenues. And so maybe I'll just leave it at that. I'm passionate about creative culture.
Oh, that's a great answer. Dazza is here as well, and he's sideways up. Okay. Look.
Nice T-shirt, Dazza.
Dazza, you don't know the context of the question that we're asking right now, but essentially you need to introduce yourself without talking about what you do or where you're from. You're going to have you're muted right now, so you have to unmute yourself to hear you.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi. Good morning.
Yeah, I'm infusing myself with what now?
You need to introduce yourself without talking about what you do or where you're from. So you can't
Okay.
where you're from. So don't talk about your T-shirt is all that I'm going to say. So it's Kanan's turn now. And, Jameson just spoke about the joy of playing in a band, the joy of jamming with another human being and having, creating creative output for its own sake, not necessarily for another, but if beauty is made for another, that's just a wonderful consequence as well. Kanan, it's your turn.
Lovely to meet everyone and very excited. And thank you for the first question. Right now, the name that goes with my video is my company name. So I have to kind of say very clearly that I'm going to be talking on my behalf and not the company's behalf. So I'm not going to be introducing about my company. I tried to log in a couple of times, but somehow it doesn't work. So if you take that apart, I'm Kanan Dhru. How to introduce myself? There's so many ways in which I can introduce myself without talking about my work. And then I can say that it is actually my work which has forced me to think of my other identities. So let's say I am deeply interested in life and people and culture and music and art and travel, everything that, makes me curious and makes me wonder. So I am someone who really relates to the sense of wonder and sense of the power of things which are intangible. And for me, that is very interesting. One of the things that we really care about is the idea of love, because I think love is a source that is more powerful even than gravity, and there are miracles that happen because of it. And that also makes me someone who's deeply interested in spirituality, because ultimately spirituality talks about the force of love, and everything comes down to that. So if I go a step further than that brings me to simplicity. So simplicity of things. The most profound things in life are simple. So these are my thoughts. These are my different identities that I wear other than my work. And very interested to continue this conversation if it goes into this direction with this first question. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for sharing that. So love, simplicity, and spirituality. Three virtues of...
Yes, with sense of wonder at the start.
Wonder without saying anything. Dazza, it's your turn now to introduce yourself, but no talking about what you do and where you're from. You need to unmute yourself again. Yes.
Surely. Well, I'd say the first identifier of who I am is a name. So Dazza Greenwood. And when I think of myself, it definitely is not in terms of work or profession. But one of the first things is think of my role. I think family member, I think citizen, and I think also sometimes about places and times where I'm having experiences where I feel very at home. And so one of those for me has always been lying down in green grass with a blue sky above and the sun on my skin. Especially the way it feels in California is a particular feeling. That's where I'm from. That exact aspect of how it hits the earth. So but actually I can lie down on green grass anywhere and feel pretty similar in the sun. And so there's something about that, the essence of that experience that I think is inextricably tied to a facet of my identity, and an identity from which I introduce myself now. Another one is, I'd say, the player with of puppies, because, oh God, puppies are so wonderful and they unlock something deep within me, some ineffable core identity, which is, I believe, the identity from which you want me to introduce myself.
That is precisely right, Dazza. That's precisely right. You sound like you could be a Windows wallpaper with that introduction. Beautiful puppies and green grass from the California sun.
And blue skies.
The bluest skies for you. The core of your... It's great to have you. I believe everyone might have inadvertently or advertently been introduced to you through that beautiful introduction. So thank you all for being here. And okay, so we're going to try to be a little sharp and thankfully...
There you go.
He's just walking. He's everywhere. No, doesn't never goes away. He's like the air that we breathe.
I'm curious, Dazza, would you prefer a cloudless sky or a sporadically clouded sky? Not partly cloudy, but you like a few clouds in there, or do you like a pure blue sky?
I like a few clouds. I mean, well, completely cloudless. I like a few clouds just for reference, the puffy variety naturally. But I do like it when it's largely just open and blue because it feels like a canvas where I can daydream when I'm just kicking back in the grass about anything. And and also it makes sure there's no interruption with my direct connection to that sun, which is what I truly crave. Thank you for asking, Jameson.
Sure thing.
Are you in California now, or are you in New York?
I'm in California right now. I have this cloudless sky behind me. You can't see it. Oh
man,
but...
jealous.
It reminds me, Badri, it reminds me of that. What is that line from Oscar Wilde? Oh, that little tent of blue which prisoners call the sky.
Oof. We're all trapped in our dreams now. So speaking of dreams, guys, I feel like given the five of us here, it's likely that we can speak about precipitation for the next 1.5 hours. We need to seriously resist that urge. The rest of our viewers, So let's talk about. Today we say we're going to talk about legal hacking, right? And legal hacking is. And I'd like you all to capture in a couple of sentences what your dream for a good way of making law look like, right? So what does a good way of making the law for the future look like? What are its virtues going to be? You can think about the making of law in the context of your firm. You can think of it in terms of the different kinds of things you can leverage, whether it's people or data or participation. You can think about it as leveraging governments and creating like forward-looking models which have perhaps nothing to do with the law at all, right? The law as we know it, but has something to do with justice. So can you think about and articulate what you think your priorities for remaking the law would look like, right? Why does legal hacking even exist as a thing? That's really the fundamental question. And Dazza, we'll start with you this time and go around the room. Is that okay?
Sure. Good question. So I think one way it would look is human-centered. So right now, the way the law is expressed is, very archaic in a sense. It's not expressed very differently than when it was chiseled in stone or written on parchment. But now today, in the information age, and as I don't know about you, but I'm communicating to you through my phone. And then, I guess the other, these personal information devices, so much of the rest of our information in the economy and in social circles is really sculpted around individual and group experiences and is context sensitive to what we are doing. I think that's one of the key dimensions of with hacking law. I look at it as computational systems. That's the aspect of technology that I like to use when it comes to working with and reforming law. So one thing would be making it much more accessible, understandable, usable, and centered around the individual people who are seeking it for all the different reasons that we do. You can do that through applications to some extent, but also, I think there's a level or two deeper that we're refactoring, if you know that word, but is needed in order to allow the applications to be sculpted around people. And that really exists at the way the data that is the law is constructed, and then some sort of service layer APIs so that we can actually pull from the different sources as needed to help to drive and engineer applications that can be truly human-centered. So I'd say that would be one aspect. There's so many more, but I'm very interested to hear a few from others, and I can pop in with some other ideas as needed later.
No, can I just restate what you just shared with us, just to make sure we understood that, right? So you are obviously suggesting that the law as we know it right now is not human-centered. You feel like it might have priorities other than being human-centered. For instance, in law, we can say retribution is probably a bigger priority than reformation as an ideal.
Could you repeat the last? It was garbled.
Yeah, I said that in criminal law, for instance, you can argue that retribution being a priority over reformation as an ideal of the criminal justice system is a reflection of it not being human-centered in a certain way. And the second thing you said was about thinking about law and justice in this application API kind of format, where there's a background of justice and there's the capacity to draw from it and make it your own in different kinds of ways. So the human centering is not just a matter of a user, but also a creator of the laws that someone potentially uses. That like roughly?
Yeah. I'm glad that you sought to clarify. So yeah, I totally didn't mean that. Sorry. It's hard to know what level of abstraction to speak at. And so obviously I was too abstract. So more specifically what I meant, I'm sorry. And I should say, it's completely understandable that you might have thought I said that based on what I said. So apologies, I'll quickly correct. By user-centered, I'm speaking more about a kind of a user experience, user interface, if you will, that's quite agnostic to the content of the law. And so whether in criminal justice, for example, it's for retribution or punitive versus restorative or what have you, totally different. I'm literally just talking about something that in some ways is very boring because it's just format almost. But like, how do you know if you're not already a criminal lawyer in that jurisdiction with a lot of experience, what the body of criminal law even is, what your defenses might be, what is the criminal procedure, anything about it. Like, it's almost impossible to know. Why? Because it's written in this, what's become almost a bureaucratic kind of process that's designed for, I don't even know who, I suppose for armies of lobbyists, maybe would be the use case if I was drawing out the ideal persona of the user of law as it is currently published and formatted and put out there. And so what I think we need instead is just a way to access it as though you could do search, filter, sort, and then even drive like an interface. Like some of the ACLU and others have put out EFF, these great little protest applications that are tuned to a jurisdiction, so you can know really exactly what the applicable laws are in that context at that time, in that jurisdiction, and it will help guide you. Similarly, but that's because they had a lot of people hours to force and reinterpret and in a sense kind of refactor one little snippet of the law into one application. But if the law were engineered, if the data that is the law, the written stuff was not like locked in PDFs and in other formats, but if it was accessible as data that was well labeled and tagged, and if we had well engineered and documented APIs so that people could draw the different things, then you could formulate applications that for a person that's a small business person, or for somebody that's a student or a parent, or somebody that's maybe in a criminal law situation, could very quickly find and work with the aspects of the law that are relevant to that individual human or small group. In that way, human-centered just in the beginning. And then that opens up, I think, a lot of opportunities to talk about reforming the content of the law itself, so it's much more relevant and perhaps just and fair for the applications where it must fit.
Right. So you're speaking about the format of law, access to it, making sense of it, and having great clarity in terms of its context and applicability. I mean, to know what it might say and when you might have to apply it, even without getting into what it actually says, right? So to be able to access in the first place. It's a fair point. Thanks for the thumbs up, Dazza. Siddharth, it would be interesting to hear you speak about this because you've been working with large technology companies for several years. You've been looking at large corporations for several years. And you've also been interested in the future of the law firm as an idea. So I'm curious to hear what you think the first priority of redesigned system should be.
Okay. Just purely speaking from a practical, practitioner's perspective, let me give it some context. Actually, this pandemic actually has brought out some elements which I think are crucial going forward, and that is that our system, and I think this is true of many systems across the world, perhaps in the more developing country context, is that despite the so-called advancements in technology and the use of in the legal system, it's actually pretty poor, come to think of it. That the adoption of technology truly for the benefit of the system and the people at the end of it hasn't actually happened. I mean, I'll give you an example. This whole online courts that we've had to deal with in the last 3 months, right, has effectively created a caste system in that only urban, fairly well-to-do litigants are able to access any sort of justice, right? And our structure, the bureaucratic structure of our state, has been shown to be completely rotten, right? If I can put it as bluntly as that, right? So how do we address that going forward? I mean, it actually shows that the fundamental means to deliver aspects of justice to the common man, right, in all of these, all these big words, is really it's all well and good to say technology will be an enabler, but I don't think anyone in the system today has, especially in the bureaucracy, has any idea of how to deal with that. I'm sorry, I mean, just some initial thoughts on that, because I want to hear a little more, but before I can formulate some other points.
So we'll keep it at that, and perhaps we'll hear Jameson and then reflect back on it. Jameson, re-architecting the law from the beginning, what are your first priorities? I have a begin with creative output. I'm just thinking.
It's not. It's actually not. I'm in listening to Siddharth's answer, I'm so excited to hear from Kanan, because I think that there are great examples of justice entrepreneurs who have tried to try to ensure that justice technology is accessible to those who are not from urban middle upper class. I think of barefoot law as an example, or SMS-based, text-based law, where you meet individuals who are interacting with the justice system where they are. And I think that some of those technologies, they're really, really basic, are not only inspiring, but also necessary to improve access to justice. So that's all to say, I'm really excited for Kanan's answer. So I want to get out of the way as quickly as possible. But I think that there are a couple things that come to mind. So what's the purpose of the justice system? I don't have the answer, and there are people who spent their entire careers saying things way more eloquently than I can after one cup of coffee in the morning on a Sunday morning at 8. But I think that there are some things that folks are looking for when they interact with the justice system that should serve as North Stars for us. One is closure. So interacting with the justice system to have some sense of closure, whether there was a wrong or trying to vindicate some right. Another one is dignity, being recognized as a human, as an individual, as a family member, as a citizen, like Dazza. Another is fairness, to know that you're being treated the same way as any other person, regardless of caste or background or economic position. With that is predictability, understanding when you go into the process that someone can say, here's what's going to happen, and that's the way it works. Efficiency, of course, knowing that something's going to get done in a quick way, or as quickly as possible, respecting the rights of the people and people's desire to be heard, and beyond heard, understood, because I think that's essential to closure. Of course, access is a huge component to that. And then norm preservation, to the extent that the goal of the justice system is to reflect our community norms, and to monitor those community norms in order to preserve them, which goes into community predictability and things like that. So taking some of those goals of the justice system, or kind of underlying interests in the justice system, I think that in order to improve those, there are the main characteristic of legal technology or legal system improvement, legal innovation should be openness. And first is access to information. So I think that whether that's general civic education or specific legal education, the openness of that educational materials, so access to open educational resources for law, access to process information that's accessible to anyone regardless of income or literacy, so they have a way of understanding how the system works, how they interact with it, how they fit into it, and how they might vindicate their rights. Then there's the idea of open technology. So using open source, for example, like there's a tool called DocAssemble where any legal innovator can build a question and answer app really easily and then make that available for others, whether to improve upon, to make more secure, or to import to their own local circumstances, because so much of justice is local. And then finally, there's also this idea of open policy discussion, which is to say that there's a guild of lawyers, but then within the guild of lawyers, there's a guild of technology policy and technology law experts within ICT law. And they have their own debates, and they have their own language, they have their own norms, and they have their own history. Opening that up to everyone else so others can understand what's happening, why it's happening, but then also to express their concerns, their hopes, their fears, and then to have the ultimate laws or regulations or processes reflect those hopes and fears, I think is critical. And it all starts with openness, making sure that it's to the extent possible free to access, that anyone can take part in it, meaningful participation, and then also the feeling that the person having been entered into, or the person having entered into the conversation and meaningfully participated in the conversation has sees their rights, their concerns, hopes, fears reflected in whatever the outcome is, or at least understood. And so I think that's really it, kind of like North Stars of the legal justice system, and then doing it in an open way to make sure that everyone has as much access as possible.
Right. So, I mean, I broadly heard like 4 key ideas, if I were to like recapture that. The first one is the sense of acknowledgement, being seen for who you are and what your dispute is, why you're here. Then there's the aspiration towards openness. I'm not really able to say what the limits to this openness are. I don't see what shouldn't be open, really, if you ask me, from what you're saying, Jameson. It feels like all policy and all conversations around the making of law should always be open. So unless there are private contracts and questions which by design shouldn't be, I don't see why we should at any point in time adopt an alternative kind of philosophy. Then the other 2 values, so to say, there's access, and access in different forms as user, as a participant maker, so on and so forth. And this idea of preservation of norms, so which means you have to have a sense of your norms and amplify it. Yeah, it's a very nice constellation of principles to drive the remaking of any new legal system. So Kanan, last answer on the first round. And I believe Siddharth might have to drop off right after that. So we'll hear you out. Siddharth might have something to say, and then we'll resume our conversation.
Shall I go then?
Yes, please.
Awesome. Amazing answers and give me a lot to reflect on. However, I come back to the first 4 qualities that I started with. That is the simplicity, love, wonder, and sense of spirituality, which I would call here self-awareness. If I had to reimagine the future of law and the justice systems, these 4 qualities would really top the chart. Simplicity because to say it simply, that's how the laws should be. And the way that it inspires people to think about and interact with it more. That sense of wonder that it would create, that why something that governs me should be this way or that way. To have that communication with the legal system or the law itself, the law should inspire that rather than the hesitation that we have currently, that, oh, this is something which is foreign, I have to have somebody else to describe it for me. It has to be kind of, very relatable. And that's where I come to self-awareness. Something law should lead you to think about your role in the society, what part you have to play, and your relations with others, including the government. So that maybe the laws have cause and effect relationship with that idea of self-awareness. And at the end of the day, love, I mean, the compassion and the human-centeredness that Dazza talked about. Honestly, Badri, I see that there has to be a shift in the power relations in which the laws are created, implemented, and understood. The whole top-down approach is something which is, honestly, doesn't make sense to me, when the ultimate, how can you say, outcome of good legal system is to create justice, and to have that assumption that it is the institutions which are necessarily the creators and implementers of justice in the society is taking the role of the institutions too far, in my opinion. In the society itself, there are informal systems which work more effectively. Jameson mentioned the barefoot lawyers and the justice entrepreneurs, the tremendous role that they play in making sure that laws are not seen as a foreign being, but solutions to everyday problems that people face. What are the daily justice needs of people, and how the system can and the existing laws can answer that. So there are so many stakeholders that need to be looked at and to be given credit to in terms of the role that they can play. Organizations as Jameson mentioned, like DocAssemble, or communities like Legal Hackers. In the times going forward, as Siddharth mentioned, post-COVID, I think more and more the power dynamics, yes, Dazza, the power dynamics are shifting and need to shift from the top-down institutional approach to a community-driven, grassroots, people-first approach to how laws and justice systems should be.
Right. I think that's a great answer. What I really liked about it is, I can see others clapping to your answer as well, Kanan. I think it's very important to remember it's human before anything else. So thanks for stating it in those terms, And the idea that like disaggregated systems are far more resilient than centralized models, I think has become evident to the whole world now. It might have been evident to smaller groups of people earlier, but it's clearer and more obvious right now. So thanks for reminding us of that. Siddharth, do you want to say anything else, or just say goodbye, and should we resume our conversation? You've muted yourself, Siddharth.
I'm saying no, sorry, my apologies. I'm going to stay on for a few more minutes. I want to hear a little more of this conversation. I'm going to just stay back. I'd love to hear what reactions are there to what Kanan just mentioned. I think it's a very valid point, set of points to raise. Maybe I'll drop off in a bit, but please go ahead.
So across all of you, we have 4 kinds of priorities, which is what is really lovely for the next question that I want to ask all of you, which is, so how can we create legal hacking to participate in the process of making your own laws, remaking your own laws, creating better justice systems? Now, I'm just talking about making it possible for more people to participate in this exercise, because earlier, as I said, you need to be able to search your laws, find it more easily, so on and so forth. Is that enough? Is that really a qualifying skill? What would we do? What could we do for someone from a non-elite background to participate in legal hacking? What can we do for someone from a different linguistic context to participate in legal hacking? What could we do to enable, say, a contemporary dancer to do in the context of legal hacking, right? Because this is really then a question of civic education. What are the, I suppose, what would your syllabus of civic education be if you wanted to enable better participation? I mean, I am assuming that legal hacking and being a good citizen is coextensive with each other. Because in my imagination, at least, like being a citizen is not just a matter of obedience, right? And following what the state asks you to do. But there is an exercise in choosing to make the law by virtue of your action, right? Your action is what has made the law the law. And when you choose not to follow it, that's a reflection of your of what you think of as what the law should be, So in a certain way, like the law is not really as fixed as it is. And the question I want to ask all of you is, how can we enable more people to be legal hackers? And what should we be mindful of while trying to do that? Dazza, let's start with you and then go around.
Okay, thank you. So here's a few things that I guess now we can reveal our identities that are closer to like what we do in the daytime. So one thing, mostly what I do in the daytime is consulting at civics through civics.com. Civics.com, kind of connected to some of what you just said there. But sometimes I spend some time at MIT at running law.mit.edu with others. And we're working on answers to that question from one perspective, which is call it an engineering perspective. So that must be filled out primarily by some other perspectives of justice and the deep principles and priorities, which I hope and expect others will speak to. But similarly to my first answer, in order to get to things like what Jameson said, SMS and simple tools and open standards and open data. Some things do need to be engineered well so that these things can happen easily. So the SMS is being generated from somewhere and it's saying something. Right now, to do those things, we need a lot of people that are carefully, almost like librarians and taxonomers and people that are figuring out exactly, like duplicating the law in a certain sense and then driving their applications from it. So what we need is a way to have the underlying law engineered well in order to unleash the opportunity to use it in creative, effective ways. Very importantly, among them, legal hacking, legal education, and the questions you were just talking about. So as we've looked at this at MIT more closely to say, what are the things we would have to reform in order to engineer law itself? So to open for these types of use cases, here's what we've come up with. Here's a sneak peek. It's not going to be published until next week, maybe the week after. So we're in pandemic time here, but so these are the computational law development goals. One of them, the very first one, is human-centered. We've spoken to that. Another one we think is critical is measurable, in a sense. So let's say you're hacking the law with your city or with your state or province, and you want to do something that allows for greater access to justice, say for tenants to not be unjustly evicted. How do you know if the thing that you've hacked is effective? Like according to what? How do you measure the performance of the law? How easy it was for people to use it? We know how to do these things if we're Google and Facebook very, very well, very, very well. But we don't really build these into the systems of law themselves. Maybe we pass a law and some group will measure things like how many times did people appear in court, or maybe you can even get to the outcomes, but not really. And none of that stuff's accessible. And more to the point, it hasn't been engineered into the law itself. As the law is more deliberately data-driven, we can and we must make it more measurable in many ways, which means, well, I should have said this first, but law is data. So like I expect every bit of law and statute regulation to be in like a JSON format that is well documented. Interoperability is, I think, one of the key ones to get to the outcomes that you were just describing. So you have civic hacking and you've got engaged education. There really needs to be, to Jameson's point, open standards, open data, and they need to be constructed in a way that's interoperable. So in other words, you can take components and use them in other components. Right now, you can't. We don't even have components hardly, but definitely things don't fit together well. They have not been designed with interoperability in mind. There are no real standards for that. There's plenty of standards for that for like weather. If you look at a weather service, there's standard interfaces, standard data formats, standard other standard components that can geocode it and put it onto a map for you. It's very standard, and therefore it's very and the interoperability points are standardized. We need something like that in law so that people can work with it. And then like in building in ways where we have these collaboration points between government, civic groups, industry, education, basically public sector, private sector, finding constructive ways to to allow for better partnerships and interactions. We also think is part of what will be necessary in order to unleash the utility of law, so people can do things with it, such as these hacking events and in education, but also, throughout every layer and segment of the economy and society.
Hey, can I just ask you an associated question in this context? What aspects of law do you think, of putting law together, do you think are not captured by the metaphor of engineering it?
Most of them. But a really very important one, I would say, is the principle and the value that I would call justice. I think engineering is quite agnostic to concepts of justice. If anything, really well engineered systems, I'm sorry to say, I associate more closely with fascist regimes, like Mussolini, like make the trains run on time and just make it work. But you know what? Efficiency and effectiveness does not have to be and should not be the domain of just far right-wing people. I'd say like people that have broader concepts of justice absolutely should get real tightly connected with people that are really good at engineering things if you want to be effective and successful.
Okay, that's a great answer. I'm not going to say anything more right now because I know, Jameson, do you want to go next? Because I know you'd have a lot more to say about this.
Sure.
How do we
Just before that, Badri, I'm going to have to unfortunately drop off.
you have a good evening, Siddharth.
Bye, Siddharth. It was nice to meet you.
Thanks. Sorry about this. Thank you.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Badri, for the opportunity and for the question. So with Legal Hackers, so yeah, once again, revealing who I am, what I do. I spend my pre-work hours and post-work hours and lunch times as one of the global directors of Legal Hackers, which is the largest grassroots legal innovation community in the world right now. So 180 chapters all around the world. It's existed for over 8 years now. And so I spend a lot of my time on the phone with prospective organizers who are starting new chapters, existing organizers who've been through a year or 2 years or even longer with their chapters and trying to understand community dynamics. And some of those dynamics involve first bringing together people of different disciplines, so lawyers, technologists, designers, artists, entrepreneurs. Another is bringing people together at different stages of their careers, so students and professionals or even retirees. And then another is people at different stages of their learning journey. Maybe they're an expert in one domain trying to understand another domain. So what's critical to this and what's critical to all communities is broadcasting what your norms and rituals and what the expectations are in order to create a more or less welcoming environment. So the traditional legal guild is a not particularly welcoming environment, simply in the respect that in order to participate as a lawyer in many kind of like in the United States, you need to go through your secondary degree, and then you need to make sure that you go through college, and then you have to go through an additional master's degree before taking a bar exam. And then after the bar exam, you need to get access to a job. And then depending on the prestige of the job, in many respects, determines how effectively you can participate in the system as a whole. Not a super welcoming environment. With Legal Hackers, we kind of want to flip that on its head and say at the outset, everyone is welcome, regardless of your background, regardless of where you are in your journey, career journey, learning journey. We want everyone to come together. And so it's really critical that we broadcast those norms and do that regularly at every single meeting, do that in the way that we structure our events. So with hackathons, for example, they're a great way of bringing people together. I think they're more community building than tool building efforts. But one of the challenges is that if you make it too technical, for example, a specific challenge, then you exclude a lot of people. So we want to make sure that everything that we do is very inclusive. So yeah, broadcasting norms, I think, is a huge thing. Another thing is creating a culture of contribution and a culture of sharing. which is if you're an expert, then you should feel a sense of duty to share what you've learned with others, to lift up other people. That's your contribution to the conversation. If you're someone who's new to a field, or if you're new to the community, feeling like your contribution is giving others an opportunity to share, or asking great questions, or contributing your own unique experience from outside a specific domain. So really creating that open communication and a culture of sharing, I think, is really critical. Another is starting small. One of the challenges I think that many legal hackers chapters faced within the coronavirus pandemic was a desire, an urge to do giant projects. So let's create huge indices. Let's bring everyone together. Let's solve these giant problems. When really what people wanted to do was have heart-to-heart conversations about what was going on, how they were feeling, trying to figure out some simple questions. How do I do my law firm at home? How do I raise my next round for my startup? Or how do I just interact with other people? How do I make sure that I don't go crazy? And so creating these small environments, these intimate environments for people to connect is also really critical. So people feel that it's a safe space. And then also providing different opportunities for people to participate in the way that's best attuned to their learning style, to their way of connecting with other people. So for example, with open educational resources for law, not just having Zoom meetings where you could get called on by the person running the session, but also short YouTube videos on a topic so that someone can learn in their own time and enter a broader conversation or discussion when they feel ready to. So of course, combining that openness, the projecting of values, of open values, but also providing opportunities for people to enter when they want to and leave when they want to as well, feeling comfortable, feeling their dignity, throughout the process. So I think that these are some of the core things to me about creating these open participatory environments.
Okay.
Wait, so, Jameson, before you leave that, could you speak for a moment on the precept that legal hackers events and activities should be open and free to all? Because that's, I think, something distinguishing that underlies some of what you said, but you didn't say it. You didn't communicate that part yet.
Sure. Yeah. So legal hackers legal hackers events are open and free to all, which means that everyone can participate, and we project those values. The idea of making it free, I think it's first of all, it's because we want everyone to feel like they can participate regardless of financial background, to feel like everyone is welcome to participate. And then also to create a different standard. In the United States, we have continuing legal education, which are generally paid programs that you're required by the bar to take in order to maintain your bar license. And they provide valuable insight, but often they're really expensive, sometimes $500 or $1,000 for one session. There is also a cottage industry of kind of legal innovation consultancies that put on events. And once again, there's value in the content of those events, but they're very, very expensive. And so what we wanted to do is do something different to make sure that everything was for free. And then folks ask chapter organizers or others, well, how do you make it free? And that's part of the challenge. It's part of the excitement, is to find supportive members of your community to offer free space, to offer free food, in order to create this welcoming environment where we think of sponsors as community members who are contributing something that they have to help the community run, whether that's space, food, time, etc., or money, right? But yeah, once again, it's all about openness, and I think free as in beer, and in addition to free as in freedom.
Yeah, fair enough. And it's just very clear that communion and communication is fairly straightforward, and really the only thing you need to encourage. I didn't think to ask Dazza's question because I just assumed it has to be free by default. I mean, how can you be limited in your participation in the making of law or the application of law by your status in society? Because that seems to run counter to the publicness of law in the first place, right? So thanks for stating it as much. And Kanan, what about you? How do you think we need to enable? What are the means we would use to enable better participation in legal hacking?
This is a very interesting question, and what Jameson said has so much value. So I truly, truly cherish, all the values that he stated, the rituals that he talked about. I like to differentiate between the reception in the developing countries versus the developed countries here. I say this very consciously because the developing countries, the experience of the legal system is very different. Badri, you would know how tough it is to access legal system for people in India, for example, or the struggles that lawyers have to face in terms of fending off the competition. And on top of that, the industry is so unwelcoming. Honestly, if there are opportunities like legal hackers community existing, people jump at that. I can understand why, because that represents a culture which is so open, so welcoming, where you feel accepted as someone who wants to bring about a change, and a tremendously strong international community which has so much to offer in terms of the conversations, in terms of the content, in terms of the kind of futuristic thought processes that you come across. So honestly, I feel just the fact that more awareness should be created about the community in some of the parts of the world that at least I have experienced. Maybe I'm talking only from my experience here, but even from that, I just feel how much I have benefited being part of the legal hackers. It has really been a tremendously enriching community. So yeah, definitely. I think there is so much value in just feeling accepted as somebody who thinks differently about law, and not in the traditional unwelcoming, aggressive, competitive, exclusive system.
Okay. I like how you flipped it on its head. You said the law is so unwelcoming that it's very easy to imagine why people don't want to participate in it at all. And when you open these systems, which can even be slightly open, then that's better. So thanks for saying that. Jameson's about to step off in about a minute or so. So Viru, Daza's looking inquisitively at his watch, but Jameson gave us notice, so it's only fair. Jameson, any parting thoughts for us or questions which we can bug Kanan and Dazza with for maybe about 15 minutes after you're gone before we all say bye?
Sure. So I think one of the, first of all, I really appreciate this discussion. It's been fantastic. It's for someone who's just started the day. It's a great way to start a Sunday. A lot to think about for the rest of the day. The one parting thought that I have is for those who are listening in the future, is that you're welcome. You're welcome to participate in Legal Hackers. You can start your own chapter. You can get your community together. Even if you don't know anything about it and you're just starting to learn, you can start today. One of the things that I tell Legal Hackers chapters is you start with 5 people, and then every event you ask each person to bring a friend. Your chapter gets very large very quickly. And it doesn't matter where you are. If you're at a university, you can start a student group. If you're in a small city, you can start with your small group of friends and you can grow from there. If you're in a large city, there are huge opportunities to bring together the broad community of the creative arts, together with law, together with technology. And so I hope you'll all join us. I hope you'll all join the Legal Hackers community by starting your own chapter or joining your local community. And I hope to see you around sometime. So thank you, Badri. That's all I got to say.
Thanks, Jameson. No stress. I suppose we're now going to do parting thoughts because it looks like everyone's a little stressed about what we need to do next. I mean, as I said earlier, this is only the first conversation. We keep coming back to it. Kanan, Dazza, feel free to say bye. Talk about what your hopes for this exercise will be and what your fears are, and we can all go our own way. I hope that's okay.
Yeah? Yes, thank you.
So Dazza, you Kanan, go next.
Should I go next, or Kanan, do you want to go next?
Dazza, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, did Jameson hang up yet or not?
No, I'm here.
Oh, Jameson, so I apologize for continuously asking you follow-ups, but if somebody if they heard what you said and they said, yes, that's for me, I want to create a new chapter, what action would they take? How can people inquire about creating a new chapter?
Great question. Here's what you need to do. Find 2 friends, one or two friends, who are interested in starting the chapter. Go to legalhackers.org/apply, and then whether it's a student group or a chapter, you can click on either of the links. It's a short application. Then we have a conversation, and then you can start the process. And so that's what you would do. That's where you can learn more. legalhackers.org, /apply. Thank you.
The link on our live stream, so people can pick that up.
That's great.
Thanks.
Legalhackers.org.
Yes.
I guess I would say by way of by way of closing statement, as it were, I would just say that MIT is an engineering school fundamentally. It has values and so forth, but for the most part, in the labs and when we're doing things, it's somewhat agnostic to political or even spiritual or other that sort of stuff. Like it's about engineering. So I think that's entirely appropriate, and we are in the midst of this experiment of seeing what can we learn from engineering that can be applied fruitfully to law. But what I want to do is something much more directly opinionated with respect to justice and principles of free people and self-organizing governance and human dignity. I go to legal hackers to get my hands on these questions and to find like-minded people that are willing to learn and try things that have never been done before, and to be guided by the spirit and the heart that should be the North Star of law and the rules that we make to govern and to, in a sense, define our very society. And so I found legal hackers to be really the preeminent community to be able to give voice and form to these principles, it's important to talk about principles, but sometimes it's important to start hacking and building things in that work, even as a simple little prototype. It's a good way to communicate, but it's also a good way to create something that can make a demonstrable change in reality. And to do it together is a great way for it to support and reflect our values. And the values of the people come from people themselves, operating together in small groups that build up from the bottom. That's where the highest brilliance and intelligence comes, when we unleash the minds of the people, and not from like these experts from the top telling us what we're supposed to do with very partial, distorted views, despite how many resources or whatever degrees they may have. And so I'd say when I'm ready to actually start doing something with a law that has that deep meaning, I like to go to legal hackers.
It's so nice. It's so nice of you to say that, Dazza, because the two principles I'm taking away. First is the idea of building something, like interacting with it so you enjoy the playfulness of it. And the second is this idea that, often being a follower is far more important than being a good leader, like to agree with a bunch of principles and to exercise your agency to follow them and embrace that culture. And I really think you're such a good manifestation of that virtue in the context of legal hackers, and also in terms of how you think about justice education. So thanks for stating it as such. Kanan, last words, and we can then say good night and goodbye. Or good morning.
Awesome. Last words of one of the many conversations that I look forward to having with all of you. And that would be just daring to dream and to reimagine, and wondering about the status quo, that there could be a different reality out there in terms of how we think about the systems of law and justice. And I think when more people start to do that, the communities such as the legal hackers would, find so much more, spread and conviction of people built into it. So that is really, really needed. And as we see, amazing people are in 180 chapters across the world have come together. It's definitely a community that is growing strong. And it is definitely there for people who feel that they are different and they cannot reimagine. Absolutely not true. You're most welcome. We need people like that.
Okay, thank you. Once again, ending on a humane note, and I love the hope and sort of like the devil may care kind of attitude towards the making of law, a discipline which is really noted much more for its choice, and which is not justified at all, in my opinion. Thanks for reminding us of that, Kanan. It's been wonderful to have the three of you here with us today. Thank you for joining us. These are also a series of fundraisers for COVID right now. We have a link to our campaign in the description of our YouTube channel. You can find it there. We're raising money for 3 important causes, like social security for undocumented migrants, the food security for the urban poor in India, and third, a protective gear for caregivers. So feel free to drop a bunch of bucks, whatever you might spend on a meal, not much more than that. And yeah, it's been wonderful having you. We'll see you next on Wednesday. Have a great Sunday.
Sounds great. Thanks,
Bye.
Bob.